This is Joe Cole.
This is Ruben Loftus-Cheek, and you're listening to the London is Blue podcast.
All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. As always, your host, Brandon, joined with my co-host, Dan. Sadly, no Nick today, but Dan, it is a Matt Loss special. We just wrapped up the pre-match presser from Turin with Tuchel and Jorginho, and so a heck of a lot more to cover than what we anticipated.
Well, I mean, I think that's usually the case when we bring Matt on. And again, no Nick. I mean, yesterday was his birthday, so, I'm glad he had a chance to celebrate that. And I will say it's not like a hangover thing, right? It's not like celebrating too hard because he was up earlier than any of us texting that he was getting on work calls. So maybe didn't get a chance to enjoy it as much.
Hungover.
Yeah. But Matt, how was the trip to Turin? How was Italy?
Yeah. I was just saying to you guys, it was an early start. It was a 4 a.m. start from London Stansted. The flight was about 6:45. It was a lot of Chelsea fans on that flight, actually. I was quite surprised. I didn't know how many would travel, and I thought a lot would travel the day of the game. But I would say 90% of the flight was full, and that 80% of those were Chelsea fans. So I think there's going to be a good turnout in Turin. Nobody was very loud because it was so early. Everybody was pretty sleepy. But yeah, good journey, good weather. 25 degrees here, sunny. All set for a good match tomorrow.
Well, we're excited. Obviously, that's what we're going to focus a lot of this about is the Champions League match versus Juventus. And then obviously after the break, we'll touch on questions because we always love fielding questions for Matt from you all. So, Matt, right away, we've got some interesting news on the fitness roster, and unfortunately it sounds like up to 4 players out, while Pulisic, Mount, and Reece James are out with injuries. It doesn't sound like Pulisic is anywhere close to being back. I'm surprised Mount is still out, and Reece James, it sounds like it's day-to-day based on how much pain he can tolerate.
Yeah, I mean, Tuchel didn't give an awful lot of detail about the length of their injuries. I mean, I think Reece James could well miss the Southampton game as well. And also be out for the England games and maybe come back after the international break sometime for Chelsea. Depending on who you talk to, it could be anywhere between sort of 2 and 3 weeks. I'd be surprised if he made the Southampton game, but as I say, Tuchel didn't make it clear, and I'm not 100%. Mason Mount, I think they were hoping would be fit for this game, so that's a blow. And then obviously with the Kanté Covid situation, I never thought Pulisic was going to be fit for this game. I didn't get that impression at all. And then the Kanté Covid situation rules him out for this game in Southampton. So all of a sudden, Tuchel has spoken a lot about the fact that while he has a very talented squad, he feels it is a small squad. And you can see that when a few injuries happen at once, then obviously you can see that the squad, while being excellent, and I still maintain I think it's probably the best balanced squad in the Premier League, it isn't huge, and you can already see that little problems start to occur. So it'll be interesting, some of the team selections now.
So, Matt, I think that maybe kind of digging into the Kanté one, because it seemed to have the most follow-up questions for Tuchel in the press conference. But, it seems like the follow-up questions were asked about vaccination status in the squad, Tuchel talking about not knowing where the squad is fully at. Can you maybe elaborate on his tone and kind of how he responded to those questions?
Look, I thought he dealt with it well. It's a difficult subject for managers, and it's a tricky subject for journalists to put to managers. We would all prefer to talk about football, and we would prefer not to have to sort of delve into almost the private medical issues of players and squads. But it is a fact that the vaccination issue is a big issue, particularly in the UK, I imagine worldwide. And the vaccination issue of footballers is a big issue because we know that the government and one of the chief scientists has been sending messages to football clubs, really asking them to urge their players to get vaccinated. We know that the Premier League have been urging players to get vaccinated. And we also know that the vaccination take-up within football doesn't necessarily quite reflect society. The vaccination take-up in society, I think, is probably a higher percentage than footballers because, footballers get to operate in a bubble. They get tested every day. So there are footballers who believe that if they're being tested every day and working in a bubble, that there's not the need to take any risk whatsoever on a vaccine. And the vaccination take-up is smaller. And it is going to become an increasing issue because we're coming out of summer now. We're coming into autumn. The COVID rates in England and the UK are rising again. Kids are back at school. Obviously, the change in weather is going to mean a rise in infections. And it's going to make it a bigger issue again. So it was fully understandable that Tuchel got asked a lot about it. It's fully understandable that it's not an easy situation for him to have to talk about because he's talking about other people's personal choices. And I can well believe that he doesn't fully know the vaccination status of all his players. He isn't in a position where he necessarily has to know that. That will be the medical department and the club who will have a better handle on that. All he has to know is who's available for which games.
You know, one of the, I guess, interesting things, Matt, and I guess, you know, the stance on this I take is that, you know, the club kind of receives a lot of positive praise for things like, you know, Lukaku's phenomenal interview with CNN recently about, you know, trying to continue to stamp out racism, the anti-Semitism campaigns. The club itself has run vaccination clinics to get people in. And I mean, this just seems counter to what the club tries to do. And, you know, I mean, maybe from that sense, you know, is there kind of like disappointment from Tuchel, or is it more of a kind of just like, this is the reality I'm dealt with, and I'm kind of in a bad position because the Premier League doesn't have a mandate. You know, the government has not mandated footballers, you know, in the UK requiring the vaccine as like a condition of work.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's exactly that. Given that the government haven't told people they have to get the vaccine, and as you say, given the Premier League haven't mandated it, Thomas Tuchel can't really mandate it, however much some people might like him to in a way, because you can't tell people their personal choices. You just can't. You can't, you know, you can advise players not to drink alcohol. You can advise players not to go to bars or nightclubs, and you can base a selection on it if you want to, but you can't actually ban them from doing so. You know, there is an element of freedom of choice and freedom of people living their lives within this. And if they're not breaking the law or they're not going against mandates, then it's very, very difficult. I think probably my take is that most Premier League managers would like all of their squads to get vaccinated, because at the end of the day, it does set an example, it does send a message, and also, very crudely, it gives them the best chance of probably not getting the virus and giving the manager their full squad. So from a selfish point of view, the managers are more likely to want their players to get vaccinated. But some managers have come out very strongly on it. Neil Warnock, for instance, has come out extremely strongly on it. But a lot of managers are very wary of, you know, telling footballers how to live their lives, particularly on a medical issue like this. It's a tricky subject for anybody, and everybody has a personal opinion on it. And as you say, the club have, I believe, taken a bit of a stance to try and encourage people to get vaccinated. I feel that's where the club are, without going so far that they're kind of ramming it down people's throats. But again, even if the club does that, they can't still then force the players, therefore, to have the vaccine. So it's a tricky position, and it's going to be a live issue for a while, I think. And, you know, people might get a little bit frustrated with journalists putting managers or players on the spot about it. But when players test positive and are ruled out of big games, you know, Juventus this week might not feel like as big as Juventus normally would because they're having a bad time and they've got their own injuries. But, you know, coming to Juventus and losing a player like N'Golog Kanté is a big, big blow to Chelsea. And we don't know whether it's because he's had the vaccine or not. At the end of the day, we don't know whether he's had the vaccine. And even if he had, he could have caught the virus. We saw that with Christian Pulisic, who the club did tell us had the vaccine. But it's a big issue. And so, and because it's because of COVID, that brings up the whole vaccine thing into the limelight.
So I want to ask one short question. We don't need to elaborate on this one because I don't want this to entirely be kind of the vaccination, you know, about this. There's plenty of football to talk about. But one counterpoint I threw up is, and I don't know if this is accurate, right? So please, I'm not hanging my hat on this. But the players went from, you know, 2 seasons ago, the break, the season went into the summer. Then they had no break, and we started again in the fall. Then Chelsea went to the Champions League final. Most of the players went to the Euros. and then they went right to preseason. Do you also feel like there might be a condensed timeline where club and countries have not given them the chance to like take the 4 weeks to get it?
No.
Okay.
Simply no. I think everyone has had the chance to get it at some point. And people who haven't had it, and I'm not criticizing them, it's personal choice, and I'm not getting into that debate. But people who haven't had it have done so through their own personal choice, is my understanding.
Fair enough. Well, that is good to know, Matt.
and what I'll say is just before we kind of transition to tactical changes, is it's super easy to find an appointment for a vaccine both in the US and the UK, which is where the majority of our listenership is. And so in the US, it's vaccines.gov, and then it's the nhs.uk in the UK. So if you haven't had a chance yet, easy to go do and make an appointment to do so.
All right. Well, obviously it's relevant to the squad and who's available for selection, which is why we talk about it. I think it did kind of catch some of your journalist, colleagues and yourself by surprise, I think, Matt, which is why that ended up being a big focus of the press conference. But also now we have to talk about the fact that Tuchel has to travel away to Juventus coming off the defeat to City at home in the league. And I guess, do you feel like Tuchel's taking that defeat a little bit hard? I mean, kind of the things he's talking about, he wasn't really thrilled. It seems like he was accepting that the way he set up the team, wasn't ideal in hindsight. Do you think, I guess I'm trying to figure out, because we haven't really seen these situations with Tuchel, is he going to change a lot? Now he has 4 injuries, plus a COVID exposure to deal with. Do you think he's going to come out and we're going to see something wildly different, or he's going to go even more back to basics, kind of facing this defeat in a tough test away?
I'd be very surprised if we saw anything sort of vastly different, just because his hand is a little bit forced by injuries. He won't have had the time to work on a lot because we all know there was a small preseason anyway, and now we're just in one of these situations at the moment with the Champions League restarting and the Carabao Cup where it's just game after game after game. So there's not a lot of time on the training pitch. I would be quite surprised if there was anything drastic in terms of formation change or style change. He's going to have to make personnel changes. But again, whether he's willing to take a big risk within those personnel changes, I personally doubt it. I don't think it's probably the right time to. I think it's the time to probably try and dig in, even if the performance isn't amazing, to try and just get through the next couple of games through the international break. I think probably his disappointment comes from the performance rather than the result. I don't think losing to Manchester City would ever, unless it's, right at the end of the season and it's a real title 6-pointer. I don't think losing to Man City, having not lost yet this season, is something that would make him particularly upset. I think the nature of the performance, and also on the back of, let's face it, a sticky first half performance against Tottenham, a sticky first half performance against Aston Villa. We haven't seen a 90-minute performance for a little while from Chelsea now. A sticky performance in the Carabao Cup. I know it was different players. I think it's probably the accumulation of a few poor halves and then a poor performance against City that's maybe disappointed and upset him, rather than the result itself. The result itself, actually, losing 1-0 at City, that can happen at any time, and that can happen with a great performance. But it was a really disappointing performance, and the setup and the tactics in that game didn't work. No shots on target, which is a damning stat.
So what expectations, maybe, kind of from what you've analyzed from the press conference, are you expecting from this Chelsea team, Matt? Maybe transitioning a little bit from what Tuchel said to how you're interpreting it and what your expectation is.
Look, I think he's going to want them. I think he's going to want them the pressing, I think, is going to be an issue. I think he's going to want the pressing better than it has been, and higher up the pitch. And that is difficult to do without Mason Mount in the team. That is where they miss Mason. Mason is a guy who often leads the press at the front. I think he'd have been disappointed with Werner's pressing, I've got to be honest with you. And I know Werner's pressing under Lampard was an issue. Whether now with Mount out he can take out Werner, we'll see. But I think there's probably a little issue there. And I think he's just going to want them to control that midfield better. So that's what he will be looking for. He'll want them to take control of the match in Juventus, and he'll want them to press high. particularly as you know, Juventus with Bonucci, there is an opportunity, however good a defender he is, and he is an incredible defender, there is an opportunity against Bonucci to try and press high at the pitch and cause problems that way. So I would imagine that's what he'll be looking for. And I think his team selection will probably reflect that, although that is vastly hampered by the absentees.
I think there's going to be an interesting stat line that comes out about the average age of the center backs in this one. I feel like Opta is going to be all over that.
Never.
Yeah,
Matt, were you listening to the Juventus side of the press conference? Have they already held theirs?
No, that's this evening. That's at 8 p.m. local here, so that hasn't come up yet. All we really know from the Juventus end at the moment is what you guys know, is that Dybala and Morata are out. I'm a bit sad Morata's out. That'd have been fun to see Morata against Chelsea, given his struggles at Chelsea. I think that the local guys think De Ligt will partner Bonucci. I think they think it'll be Chiesa. Chiesa may be playing up front, right at the top end of the pitch, which again will be interesting. You know, we saw that Chiesa was wonderful in the Euros. You know, real star man and really dangerous player. He can go missing in games a little bit, but he can also really take the game by the scruff of the neck, and particularly on the break cause a lot of problems. So that'll be very interesting if Chiesa plays. I think Moise Kean looks like he's going to play up there. So again, you know, he will be, maybe they can go long into Moise Kean because he is a more physical sort of presence. And of course, they've got Locatelli, who I think is probably there, from what I understand, Juventus' standout player this season in what's been a difficult season so far. It sounds like Locatelli has been playing well. When you look at their potential team, you know, I'll go through it for you. Szczesny, Danilo, Bonucci, De Ligt, Alexandro, of course, linked with Chelsea for a long time, Cuadrado, former Chelsea, Bentancur, Locatelli, Rabiot, Kean, Chiesa. Despite all their problems and despite their injuries, you know, it's a decent side on paper. They should be a challenge for Chelsea. They should be a test for Chelsea.
Well, and it should be good to let a player who's played against them more recently, like Romelu Lukaku, get at that back line. He did score, I think, once against Inter, or for Inter last season in the matches they played against Juventus. So at least someone on the side has a familiarity with putting one past the old lady's defense.
Yeah, and you know, I would imagine he'll relish it. I'd imagine there'll be a lot of local interest in Italy in Lukaku coming back. Like you say, playing against Juventus, Inter Milan for a couple of seasons, we're really sort of gunning for that Juventus team to try and take the title off them. So that's an interesting subplot, and you would imagine he will come here full of confidence because he smashed it in Italy.
So obviously it's kind of funny how sometimes there's a team that has domestic form and European form, and I think that's what you're going to get from Juventus. While they may be off to a rough start, new manager, old manager, new manager, they've had some changes in the squad. For whatever reason, the Champions League tends to bring out a different side of teams. We've seen Chelsea obviously be mid-table, win it. We've seen Liverpool not really struggle in the league, but definitely were much better in Europe than they were domestically. It happens. So this is, as far as like the group stage goes, important. Sometimes these are the matches that are different between the number 1, number 2 seed. I'm not really convinced how big it is to be the number 1 seed anymore, as we've seen the draws and these wild results. All that matters is advancing. So you want to at least get a point away, on the road from this one. But I don't expect Juve to roll over by any means.
No, I mean, what I would say, what I was encouraged about for Chelsea, and, we haven't heard from Allegri today yet, but we heard from Allegri at the weekend after Juve's win at the weekend, when he revealed that Dybala and Morata are out. And he was a little bit negative, I thought. He was asked about the Chelsea tie and how big it was then. And he kind of said, well, it's a big game, but it's not one of the most important games in the tie. The 2 games against Zenit will decide this group for us. And I thought that was a little bit defeatist from Allegri, and sent a slightly negative message to his players, where he was almost giving them a free pass for this game, whether that was to try and take pressure off them. But I was surprised he almost tried to write off the importance of this game for them. So we'll see if that message changes later.
Super interesting. I guess just lastly, anything from Jorginho that you gleaned out of the presser? I think it got cut short for us, or was it just short in general?
It was very short in general. He was late in and early out, shall we say. I think it was only about 5 minutes of Jorginho. He didn't want to get into the COVID or the vaccine subject at all. He completely sidestepped that. I've got to be honest, he really didn't have a lot to say. It
Tough
felt like
question to roll into, though, to be fair.
It is. I mean, I suspect the slight delay in him coming in was Chelsea very professionally briefing him beforehand to say, look, Thomas has just been asked a lot about this, and unfortunately for you, you're going to get asked about it, and you can either sidestep it or you can take it head on. He chose to sidestep it. Sometimes the player press conferences are great. Sometimes they're fulfilling an obligation. Today's was very much fulfilling an obligation, I felt.
Dan, I loved his tactic. I'm sorry, what? I didn't understand. You don't usually get that 4 times out of Jorginho out of 5 questions.
It's a good tactical strategy. It's equivalent to passing the ball sideways.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
or it's the old manager didn't see it. It's one of those.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We favored off of it. No, I didn't see it. Was it a foul? What a shame. Well, great finish from the lad. So anyways, we're going to take our ad break, but when we get back, we're going to be fielding questions from all of you to Matt. So a little bit of around the horn style here. So thanks to sponsors for financially supporting the show. We'll be right back. All right, Dan, I'm going to let you kick this one off. A little Q&A time from the Twitter, the Discord. So many questions.
Yeah, we'll start off with Tyler's, who asks, who does Matt think is more likely to stay at Chelsea next season? And he's talking about 2 loanees in Gallagher and Gilmore. Gallagher having a bit of a flying start at Crystal Palace, and unfortunately, poor Billy G having getting opportunity, but having a rough go in the club that he's at with Norwich, just continuing to take a beating after beating. Matt, what's your sense on any type of future plans for those 2? And do you see any? Have you had a chance to watch either of them a little bit this season?
I've watched a little bit of Gallagher and been really impressed, actually. I think he's come on since last season. I was quite impressed with him at West Brom last season. He did well in a very difficult season for them, and playing the sort of football that you wouldn't necessarily think would suit him. And I thought he did well for West Brom. And I being from the Midlands myself, and West Brom being a rival of Villa, I have West Brom friends who were very, very keen on Colin Gallagher and liked him a lot. But looking at him already in this Palace side, I think he's come on. The style that Vieira wants to play is very much suited to him. Vieira, I feel, is trying to almost build a team around him. He seems to be the absolute funnel for everything, attacking-wise they do. His energy is great. His attitude is great. I think he's come on a step again, and my only slight fear for him coming back for Chelsea is I just don't know where he plays, because they have so much of that talent in the number 10 and wide positions that, you have got to be some player to get into there. And he's clearly a very, very talented player, but I struggle to see opportunities for him, but he's doing really well, and he's going to force Chelsea to have a good look at that, I would imagine, if he carries on like he is. Billy Gilmore, look, I know there's been a lot of talk about, is this a good loan for Billy Gilmore just because Norwich are losing? That could be great for Billy Gilmore. It's such a test of character and such a way to build up someone's character, to be in a team that is struggling. And what Chelsea know with Farke and Norwich is that they won't ditch their principles. They won't ditch the way they play because they are losing games. So it's not like all of a sudden they're going to start hitting long ball after long ball, which would probably be bad for Billy. I suppose the only fear for Billy was if Farke were to get sacked, because that loan was very much built around Farke and his relationship with Thomas Tuchel. I think we've spoken about that on this show before. So the only worry there would be if Farke's position becomes a problem because of their results, and that could impact Billy a little bit. But I actually think it will do Billy the world of good if he's playing week in, week out in the Premier League. Even if it's a team that's losing a lot, that's different for Billy. He's not used to that, and that will build his mental strength and his mental toughness. And I personally only see good things. In terms of who I see maybe coming back quicker, probably Billy, just because I think there's more opportunity within the position he plays. But that's a really tough question after sort of 6 games of the season, to be honest with you.
Look, Billy's got to fight for minutes too. We didn't see him play in the last match, but that means he's going to have to be grafting on the training ground pitch to make sure that he is in that lineup every single time. And to your point, Matt, he's going to be getting opportunities in the sense of playing the style in which I think Chelsea really want him to because of the system that Norwich are playing. So the good news, in training, he's going to be playing that possession, move the ball fast system and everything. Just quick reminder, Gilmore, born in 2001 and Gallagher 2000, right? So you're talking about some young guys, 2021. They've got some time to develop, which is also exciting, but it just goes back to Chelsea fans. We love a good thought exercise about who's the next. We always play who's up next. So speaking of the guy who's actually won the most who's up next honors over the years, Ruben Loftus-Cheek. Yeah, we all remember him. Matt asking, do you think Ruben already surpassed Saúl in the depth chart? If he can keep progressing and continue to gain confidence, he could be a big problem for opposing teams. Feel like Saúl might be 5th choice already. 2 strong sub appearances for Ruben. Matt, is he back?
Well, what I thought was actually really interesting was the position he played against Aston Villa in the Carabao Cup when he played as a sort of more anchor midfield role. And that to me pointed to the fact that maybe Thomas Tuchel is thinking of the fact that maybe he has just surpassed Saúl a little bit while Saúl feels his way in, because it felt like that was maybe a little test of Ruben. If I'm going to see you ahead of Saúl for the short term at least, can you play in that slightly further back midfield role for me? Can you play as one of the 2 6s, or can you play almost as a pivot? And he was superb in that Villa game. He was probably Chelsea's best player in that Carabao Cup game. He's done well. He's done really well. All that Ruben could do was when he got a chance, he had to grasp it and really give Tuchel something to think about. And that is exactly what he's done. And that is fantastic. The team selection for Wednesday night here in Turin could be really interesting, actually, because with no Mason and no Kanté, can Ruben force his way into that starting lineup for a Champions League game? I possibly see him going Kai Havertz above Ruben still just at the moment. And maybe even Saúl, because Saúl, you would imagine in the Champions League, would have that experience. And, coming into the Champions League shouldn't be a shock for him, as is. And, against an Italian team who should be slower than the English teams. However, Ruben's got to be in the thoughts for here in Turin, I'd imagine. And if he were to get in, that would be a massive sign and a massive pat on the back for Ruben. And I personally would be delighted for him. But all credit to Ruben, because he's even though this season is in its early stages, he's had to really wait for that chance. And he so wanted to just get an opportunity to try and grasp. And it feels like he's done that already just by making people think and making people talk about him again.
Again, Dan, when it comes to Ruben, I would actually prefer he not play in the front 3 and come off the bench and play in the middle 2 if we do go back to the 2-man midfield, because to Matt's point, he's looked better the deeper he is versus having to play with his back to the goal or having to play on the turn.
Yeah, no, not opposed to really anything that gets Ruben minutes in the side. I think we will raise our hands again and proclaim our undying affection for Ruben Loftus-Cheek and our hopes that he makes it good at Chelsea. And if this is the way to do it in a deeper lying position, we're okay with that.
And also, there's just to add, there's the Southampton game as well, because we know Kanté's out the Southampton game. We don't know yet whether Mason Mount will be ready. It's got to be a bit of a race against time. So, even if Ruben doesn't start in Turin, maybe he could start against Southampton. But it's really good to see. It's really good. He's just someone who deserves some luck. He deserves a break, whether it will be enough to completely reignite his Chelsea career. But he just deserves a break somewhere.
Matt, we also got an interesting question from Mac, and he wanted to know, it kind of said in an earlier podcast that you've done with us, you've talked about how Roman Abramovich really does not grant interviews to the press. We're still waiting on your exclusive for some point in the hopeful future. But He asked if any journalist has tried, which I'm sure you have, to get an interview with Marina and get her perspective or get her on the record. It seems like, at least at that level, it's really Bruce Buck and below will talk in interviews in the public, but everybody else above really doesn't make themselves available.
Yeah, look, every journalist will have tried to have got a Marina Granovskaia interview. But she has that public profile anyway because of her position at the club and how well she's carried out her duties at the club. But she doesn't seek that profile. She doesn't want to put herself out. Some chief executives like to put themselves out. Christian Purslow at Aston Villa loves to put himself in the public domain. He obviously worked at Chelsea before as well, and he loves to be out there. There are others, Ed Woodward even to a certain extent, who used to do things before he got a lot of criticism. He used to like to put himself out. Marina has not sought to put herself out at all. Funnily enough, actually, I'll tell you a little story. I can't remember how many years ago it had been. I'd imagine it's about 4 years ago. There was a conference at Chelsea about, I think it might have been one of the Leaders in Football conferences that they often stage at Stamford Bridge at Chelsea. And one of the talks was about to be the role of women in football. And they weren't just talking about women's football. They were talking about the role of women in positions at Premier League clubs. And Marina was put out as down to speak as a speaker at one of these events. And an email landed to every journalist saying that, we have this event and here's a list of speakers. And they didn't make a big issue of the fact that Marina was on the list, but we all spotted that Marina was on the list. Chelsea and the conference got a flood of applications to be at the talk because it was going to be the first time that Marina Granovskaia would have spoken publicly. And within minutes of that flood, we were informed that Marina Granovskaia was no longer going to speak at that event because she doesn't want or seek that sort of profile. And once you let the genie out of the lamp in terms of making yourself available, that's kind of out. You can't put the stopper back in almost. Once you allow a public profile, it's very difficult to then go back to what you were. So while she might like some stages or there might be a temptation some stages to do one interview or to speak on one subject, there's also a reticence, I think, that once the genie is out the lamp, then everybody else will come in and make requests and everybody will want a piece of her, and she just doesn't want that, and she doesn't operate in that way. And I also feel that probably Roman values her so highly as partly for the fact that her discretion as well as her work. Sadly for us, because I would absolutely love to interview Marina, and Chelsea and probably Marina, just through my request to the club and other journalist requests, will be fully aware that people like me would love to sit around a table and actually pick her brains. But unfortunately, that's yet to happen. Maybe one day, touch wood.
Yeah, they're holding on to that secret weapon real tight. Don't want any of the tactics or the strategies accidentally getting out. But just you talking about that reminded me just how good she is. And again, I think we probably take that for granted as Chelsea fans because she's just been at the helm for so long. But that's probably not completely normal at other clubs.
I just don't think people appreciate how hard she has to work. Chelsea's board and management structure is actually pretty small in comparison to a lot of clubs in terms of numerically. And when you just look at the amount of loan players that come in and out of the club and the work that gets in, I don't think people actually realise just the sheer hard work. I don't know how she does it. And also her judgment of the market for someone who, this is a horrible phrase, but who traditionally isn't a football person, no experience of football before coming into Chelsea, no playing experience, no administrative experience. Her judgment of the market, of the value of players and the way the market's going to go in terms of value of players from outside and the value of Chelsea's own players is absolutely incredible and far better than most, far better than most, I would say. If you look when the season, I brought this up in the last pod and I'll bring it up again, very interesting situation at the moment with Rüdiger. And if you look at her judgment of the market when Chelsea were in those renegotiation talks with Willian and eventually let him go at a stage when a lot of people would have thought it'd be a mistake to let Willian go. Very, very shrewd. Very, very shrewd indeed.
So, kind of talking about being shrewd and coming up with maybe different answers to challenging problems. We did get a question from one of our friends, Andrew, asking, should Chelsea break the bank for Antonio Rüdiger? And I know that we said no transfers, but this seemingly falls under the list of renewals. So I think it can be asked without shepherding us too soon to January.
Well, I'll just ask a question back to you guys. What would you guys term as breaking the bank for Rüdiger? What's the figure that's breaking the bank? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, if you go to sign a similar level replacement and you put them on, let's just say even 150, but then you add in an amortized fee per year potentially of 9 to 10 million on top of it, 200,000 a week doesn't actually seem out of the realm of possibility if you're willing to commit more to wages than you would to kind of how you're amortizing the transfer fee.
Well, and I think the length of contract is important too, right, Matt? Because if he's asking for a 5-year contract, which I doubt he is, that changes things. Whereas if it's a 3-year contract, you'd be like, cool, give him 200 for 3. That makes sense. And we can look at 1-year renewals after that, or however the club want to play it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you've picked a good figure because this 200,000 seems to be the magic figure. It feels like were Chelsea to go very close to the 200,000 mark, then it would get quite serious in terms of the negotiations. That's obviously where Rudiger and his people currently sort of value himself at. There's been talk of some crazy money around in recent days where I just don't. I've got to be honest. I just don't see him being offered that anywhere. That sort of money. I don't really know which defenders do get offered that sort of money. 200,000 for a central defender of his age is right at the top of the market. But look, he's got an injury record, albeit not recently. His incredible form puts him in the bracket of, I would say, the best 3 central defenders in Europe at the moment. But that form isn't yet a year old. You can't be sure that this form's going to last forever. His age comes into it. So there's a lot to weigh up. And this is where Marina's so shrewd. I think she probably has algorithms, to be quite honest with you, that she judges this against. I've actually heard that in the past, and I don't know whether it's true. So please don't anyone put this out as gospel. But I have heard in the past that there are algorithms that she has for both transfers and contracts that help her come to decisions in terms of numbers. And I would imagine there's some sort of algorithm that takes into account age, injuries, previous form versus current form. And that will all be going into it. Should Chelsea just go and offer £200,000 a week to Rudiger straight away? I would say no. I would say, and this is what I think Chelsea are doing, I would say see how the next 6 months go with Rudiger. I personally don't see Rudiger in January agreeing anything with another club. It's a risk because he can do that. He can go and agree a pre-contract with another club and then you've lost the player. I don't think he would. I still suspect that his preference is to stay at Chelsea. Therefore, I think he will wait to try and find out what a final Chelsea offer looks like. Therefore, if you're Chelsea, see what the next 6 months looks like. If in the next 4, 5, 6 months he carries on his form now, then yes, he's definitely worth £200,000 a week. If anything changes within that time, then maybe not. But I wouldn't be offering him £200,000 a week today in September, no.
My big thing is just length of contract as well. As long as we're definitely no more than 4, and 4 probably stretches it for me, but I would pay him a higher wage at the end of the 6 months, like you said, Matt, for a shorter contract is like a compromise. But again, Marina's going to be wheeling and dealing that, so we'll see.
I was going to say that, and that's a great point. That will all be coming into it. He could probably earn a higher weekly wage on a shorter contract than a slightly lower weekly wage on a longer contract, and whether he's prepared to accept options and what those options look like. The detail in this that we won't get to know about will all be such key detail. But to just say now, just go and offer him exactly what he wants is kind of a bit crazy. His knee could, touch wood, it doesn't happen, and there's no sign that it will. But his knee could give way tomorrow. So anything could happen. So Chelsea will be prudent. And as I say, what I would repeat is I do think that I get the impression that if he can, he would rather stay at Chelsea, which makes me think while he would like to judge the market in January, I think it's extremely unlikely he goes and agrees anything with anyone in January.
All right, well, here's a little throwback one from a good friend, Clayton. Goes back to the transfer window, and this might have been in reaction to the Man City match. I don't know, but Clayton asked, was using Werner going to Dortmund in return for Haaland ever discussed in the negotiations? He'd like to know if you know any insight into that.
No, Haaland never got that far. They did make a move for Haaland and try to do something on Haaland, but the money, without having to go into whether they can do swaps, the money in terms of the agent fee, the transfer fee, the wages, what Borussia Dortmund were telling them, i.e., unless this is absolutely sky-high ridiculous, we just don't want to sell him. It just didn't get that far. It just did not get that far this summer, and it couldn't get that far. And we saw that with all the clubs. You know, it couldn't get that far with any club, let alone Chelsea. Whether that's something in the future will be interesting, because obviously, you know, you'd imagine that Dortmund will have to sell him next summer, and to have a ready-made replacement who has done incredibly well in German football, and who we are told from German reports would be on a Dortmund shortlist, albeit maybe not at the top. But once you've got Lukaku, I don't see them going for Haaland now. I've got to be honest. You've got Lukaku. I'm not sure you can have Lukaku and Haaland together, and also the finances of that are just ridiculous. I think the Haaland one for Chelsea's gone, to be honest with you.
You can do it in your edition of FIFA 22. We are not sponsored by FIFA 22, but I'm sure you can do it there.
The game drives me up the wall, the frustration I get out of that. No chance, Dan. No chance.
Well, Matt, we had another question from JS that's asking about a former Chelsea player. So again, just sneaks under the wire because it's a former Chelsea player as of the start of this season. Livramento receiving rave reviews at Southampton. Will the club already be thinking about making him a part of the future? And who can make way after 6 Premier League matches and a very good display against Man City?
I saw this question. The only thing it did the interesting thing about the question is what taking this back to Nathan Ake, who obviously had the buyback when he was at Bournemouth. What I've since been told about Nathan Ake's buyback was that it only activated after he'd been at Bournemouth 2 years. So Bournemouth basically said, we can't have a buyback clause whereby we buy this player and the very next summer we lose this player. We just can't have that. That's ridiculous. So the buyback was done whereby it could only be activated after Ake had been at Bournemouth for 2 years. I would guess, and I don't know, again, I want to stress I don't know, because sometimes people always wrongly assume that I kind of talk as though I know everything. But I would guess that the Livramento and Gurhi deals are similar. I can't believe that a Premier League club can take a player and have a deal where they can lose him in the very next summer transfer window. So I would imagine that it's after 2 years of being there. It's almost like a 2-year loan, which Chelsea have done before, obviously with Christensen. So I would imagine, and I would guess, that Chelsea don't have the option to take Livramento back next summer, but it would probably be from the summer onwards, or for a certain amount of time from the summer onwards after that, and it'd be 2 years, because Southampton surely have got to protect themselves a little bit. Whether if they got relegated that changes, that probably is another thing to throw into the mix. But I would have thought that Chelsea couldn't take him immediately back, and also that probably wouldn't be good for him. But wow, I mean, he has done. You asked me about watching Conor Gallagher and Billy Gilmour before. Watching Livramento, he has done incredibly well. Like, I'm not being funny, but Carl Walker-Peters was a decent right back for Southampton. You know, he was okay for them. He was not a bad right back for Southampton, but Livramento has come in and taken his place and just taken it up a notch and done so well. And he to me does look like a player who could definitely come back to Chelsea, because we've seen that on the right back position in terms of depth, and the right wing back particularly, it feels like they want something more there. And so he does feel like a player who could come back to Chelsea and have a real opportunity, certainly within the squad. But I would be amazed if Southampton have signed up to a deal where they can lose him the very next summer transfer window.
I think he's even made his way into quite a few fantasy Premier League teams because he's cheap and he plays 90 minutes consistently, and that is huge. And then Southampton get the odd, draw against Manchester United, and he gets the bonus points, the clean sheet points. So again, I think credit to Tino from going literally from a development squad side to a starting Premier League squad. That is a huge jump. And, the circumstances could have been right, things like that. But to your point, Matt, most managers will take Walker Peters just because at least he's experienced, right? He knows what to expect, but they're happy to let Tino learn on the job. And he seems to be taking every opportunity and running with it. So I think the biggest thing goes credit to the player for making that very difficult transition from youth academy to starting in the Premier League week in, week out.
And credit to sort of his agent and people as well, because that now looks like a really good move for him. When he went there, I was actually a little bit worried, would he play? Because as I say, I've seen Southampton a lot with Walker Peters, and right back didn't strike me as an area of the pitch they were, massively lacking in. And I thought if he goes to Southampton and doesn't play, then that would be a really poor move for him. But credit to his agent, they've obviously sorted it out very well with Ralph Hasenhüttl and people at Southampton in terms of guarantees and where he would fit in. And it's going to be a really good club for him to develop at.
All right, last question here from sorry, Dan, that was yours. I think
that's okay.
Am I stealing your thunder?
You're the host. You just jump in wherever you want. That's okay. Anyway, Gabriel had a question about, again, we sometimes have these questions that focus a little bit more on Matt, the person. And he wanted to understand a little bit more about your favorite traditions when going to watch a home match at Aston Villa, and how do you turn off the football journalist brain and just be a fan when it comes to a Villa match?
It's really easy, actually. It's funny because if I watch Villa as a journalist, which I've had to do, twice recently against Chelsea, and I am planning to do at the weekend against Tottenham when Villa play Tottenham. I approach those games as a journalist. There's no particular celebrations from me if they score, and there's even in the penalty shootout against Chelsea, I don't really get nervous like I do when I'm a fan. But when I go as a fan, I just feel completely different. It's nothing conscious I do. It's just something that happens. So I couldn't tell you any sort of weird routine I go through or any sort of mindset change that I plan. It's just a very, very different feel. And it's a very, very, I don't get nervous when I watch a match as a journalist, even when it's Villa. And yet when I watch a match as a fan, I get nervous like any other fan. And I shout at the ref, and I convince myself that the other team are getting all the decisions and my team aren't getting any decisions. And I fill myself with conspiracy theories, and I get carried away, and exactly the same. But no, and to be honest now, in terms of pre-match routine, because I've got young children who I try to take with me when I go to get them involved in it, it's more about just getting them ready rather than sort of anything myself. So very boring answer, I'm afraid.
Oh man, you debunked my theory. I assumed the difference was the beer involved and how that might help you change your mindset.
Do you know what? I would love to go to a game as a fan with a lot of beer involved again. I haven't done that for a long, long time, because now, like I say, when I go as a fan, I'm trying to take my kids along, because I want my kids to get into it, and I obviously sort of desperately want my kids to get the Villa bug a little bit. So I'm all about my kids going, which completely ruins any chance of doing the sort of old school way of going and having a few beers before. That would be great fun, but I just don't see when I'm going to get to do that again, if I'm honest with you.
Extra dad points for setting up the next generation, Matt. Purslow will be quite indebted to, I'm sure. My only last question for you is it very different covering Chelsea and Tottenham, maybe this season especially? Like, no offense to Tottenham fans, but it's like when you approach your articles, I feel like you're just, in Spurs, you're going, what is going on? Like, how are we in this position? And then with Chelsea, it's not that your Tottenham articles aren't serious, but it's like Chelsea, it's like, okay, let's have an honest conversation about the breakdown. Where's Tuchel at in this? It just seems like Tottenham are so far off balance and teetering that you're just like, you're not even digging into things with them.
Well, I'm digging into lots of different things, to be honest. I mean, I wrote a big piece yesterday which digging into a lot of issues within the club in terms of the staff that work at the club and some non-football related stuff. So I'm digging into things in a different way. look at cycles. It's only 2 or 3 years ago where I was writing a lot of praise about Tottenham. The year they got to the Champions League final, and a lot of the years under Pochettino, even though they didn't win anything, I was writing a lot of praise about Tottenham and writing a lot of similar pieces to what I write now about Tuchel, actually, trying to delve into Pochettino's methods, trying to delve into how he'd got the best out of some players that previously people hadn't got the best out of. But it's cyclical, and Tottenham are in a very different position now as a club, and they're in a very different position now to Chelsea as a club. They're always a very different club to Chelsea because they operate very differently. But just in terms of where the team is, it's very, very different. But to be honest, it's cyclical. It's not even 12 months ago since, I was having to write about, Lampard leaving and what had gone on behind the scenes with Chelsea and stuff like that, which isn't that much different to what I've recently been writing about with Tottenham, with losing managers and hiring new managers. So it's funny how these things go around in cycles. And it's funny how you look at football now and you wonder how the cycle will ever change. You wonder how anything will ever go wrong for Tuchel and Chelsea. And you kind of wonder how anything will ever go right again for Tottenham. But they will. At some point, they will. At some point, it will. At some point, it will go wrong for Tuchel and Chelsea. It will, because football's cyclical. It's just how long the cycle lasts. Will it go wrong in 12 months? Will it go wrong in 2 years? Will it go wrong in 3 years? Will it go wrong in 6 months? We don't know. But it's cyclical. Similarly with Tottenham, it's impossible now to look at Tottenham and think, how on earth will they get themselves out of this death spiral they seem to be entering? And I suspect that the death spiral will have to get worse before it gets better. But at some stage, it probably will get better because the foundations of Tottenham are quite strong with their stadium and everything. So it comes again, and it's weird how, as I say, you look at clubs and you just wonder, how will this club ever do badly again, or how will this club ever do well again? And yet the cycle turns. My own club, Villa, is a good example of that. Only a few years ago, you'd have looked at Villa. How will this club ever compete ever again? Just compete in the Premier League, let alone try and compete for any sort of silverware, which they're still a long way off doing. And yet, slowly but surely, they've managed to do well. And now they're a team that you can go to Manchester United and win, and go into a game against Tottenham at the weekend with some confidence. These things change. But yeah, you're right. At the moment, I'm writing on such different stratospheres with Tottenham and Chelsea. One is all about strife within the club, problems with employees, deep-rooted problems that go much further than the manager. And one is where everything is so good, and yet one defeat at Manchester City, and you're trying to debunk that. And really, it's kind of one defeat, and everything's pretty rosy, to be quite honest with you.
All right, Dan, that backfired. He compared us too closely to Spurs, so we might have to cut that in post-production. I only kid. It is your years of experience, Matt. They give us that perspective, even when, to your point as fans, we like to think that we're nowhere close to Spurs. But we do appreciate all the time you spent. Remember, Matt is in a hotel room in Turin right now, so he's putting in the extra work. We really, really appreciate that. Apologize for any audio blips or things like that, but making the effort, getting the news out. Dan, appreciate you being here. Your early morning time zone on the West Coast. It's a rough ride for you sometimes.
Well, Matt asked for, the press conference meant that being at the normal recording time meant I got an extra hour of sleep. It was great. I'm okay. I'm feeling wonderful.
Well, that all worked out. Matt, safe travels. Enjoy the match tomorrow again. Thanks for your time.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Awesome. Well, as always, Chelsea fans, more content to come later this week. But until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.